I am unashamed to admit that I have made almost no progress on the ᴬᵐᵃ animatic since the video I posted documenting the sketchbook I filled preparing to remake it 6 months ago. I would very much like to remake that animatic someday, but I got a lot out of the experience of simply making the sketchbook, and our most regular viewers would have noticed how doing that sketchbook has dramatically changed my art and thought process in basically all of my videos since then. I'm super big on concept art right now, and I intend to see where this road takes me, because the journey so far has been some of the most fun I've had with my art ever. And I've been drawing for over a decade, actually. Literally over half my life at this point. Howdy hey, I'm Ray. I recently introduced you guys to my sun, my stars, my pride and joy, my baby boy, Apollo. And at the end of his video, I teased that I wanted to add him to a sort of legacy project of mine. Guys, we need to talk about PRISM. Over a decade ago, when I was but a preteen, I began drawing because I wanted to win a beauty contest on Neopets. Originally, I was gonna tell this story in the form of a story time animation, and it was almost done, but then I decided I didn't want to do those anymore, so you guys get to see parts of it now. Anyway, I did not win that beauty contest, but through art and Neopets, I learned how to make my own characters, and I made 2 of my first ever online friends. Some of my very first ever characters were based on myself and those 2 friends, and in typical child fashion, the story those characters were for was a complete ripoff of Tokyo Mew Mew. 5 years ago, I redesigned those characters for a YouTube video, and then I kept working on them. Magical girls who transformed using little prismatic aliens made of solid light, and they received those prisms by applying for and subsequently joining a military-like organization specifically comprised of magical girls. I called the story PRISM, and I've loved it a lot over those 5 years. Blood, sweat, and tears went into that story. I learned a lot about myself through that story, including my gender identity, bitches being non-binary. But the more time that passed, the harder PRISM was for me to work on, and for the longest time, I didn't get why. But 2024 has been a major year of growth for me in every facet of my life, and the understanding I've come to is that I made 2 fundamental mistakes in crafting this story. 1, I was marrying myself to all of my first ideas and trying to force them to work rather than taking my time to explore my options. And 2, a lot of the decisions I made for PRISM originally were based on what I thought would make for a good story, and not what kind of story I would enjoy telling. For example, I love Better Call Saul to bits and pieces, but I don't think there's any timeline out there where I could write a story like that. I don't know anything about lawyers or the court system, and researching stuff like that would be a nightmare for me. I've got learning disabilities that make reading like that extremely difficult for me to process. Back in high school, I was driven to tears multiple times over trying to read my textbooks because no matter how many times I'd reread pages and paragraphs, I couldn't understand them. I love stories that are really grounded and well-researched very, very, very much. But I've had to come to terms with the fact that the enjoyment stops at consumption. Trying to write like that for myself is frustrating and disheartening, and that's okay. Because Apollo has taught me anything, it's that finding what does work for me and indulging in the things I enjoy is the key to doing what I love and still loving what I do. And as scary as it may have been to hit reset on something I had been working on for 5 years, I realized that PRISM desperately needed to be torn down to its foundations and rebuilt from scratch. And we are so freaking back! In today's edition of June straps you to a chair and info dumps about their OCs, I'm showing you guys the sketchbook I used to restart PRISM. Quick forewarning that I'm not planning on talking about any pages in depth because I think it's a lot more important to establish our new ground rules. Some things will carry over. It's still a magical girl type story with little prismatic familiars, but I have made significant enough changes to both the world and the characters that those old videos are no longer reliable as the word of God. I feel in my heart of hearts that this overview should be considered the new start to PRISM. And getting into the specifics of each page I did here would probably mostly serve to be confusing because everything in them is intended to be pure concept work. Like this sketchbook, it's not even 3 months old yet, and there's already things I drew in here that are outdated with things I've expanded upon in the digital sketchbook that's going to be a follow-up to this video. Look out for that in December, I'm already almost done. Because when I was making it, I wanted to remain flexible this time. If I have a better idea, I want the freedom to shift gears. If something isn't working, I want the freedom to drop it. And I've been doing that a lot. So that digital sketchbook is where I'll talk more specifically about the new character details. So much is changing that I can't in good conscience ask a bunch of people who have never heard of it to go back and watch the old PRISM playlist just so I can turn around and say, ain't like that now. I will, however, ask that you check out the new playlist. It's mostly Apollo right now, but all the stuff about his dead wife and his insanity will be present and important to the PRISM lore going forward. So with that, and if you'll indulge me, consider this your first real look into the new PRISM. For returning viewers, first of all, thank you. I know this video might be a little scary, but the process of making it has been incredibly productive and I'm having a blast. I am really excited about PRISM again. It's very different. And I'm gonna hold your guys' hands when I say this. Not every character's gonna make it to the other side. And even the ones who do might not be someone you recognize if you've been with PRISM for these 5 years. I'll say preemptively, it's okay if you preferred things about the old draft, but I do hope that you'll trust me enough to give the new one a fair shot. The first thing I think I should establish is the characters. Who all is here? In this sketchbook, we still have the original main characters being Katsumi, Emi, Izumi, Hokuto, Yu, and Neneko. And I phrased it as in this sketchbook because 2 of those characters will end up merging into one pretty immediately in the digital sketchbook. Eagle-eyed viewers will probably pretty easily be able to guess who, but I'm gonna save getting into that for the digital sketchbook video. This sketchbook, these 6. Then we have the characters who originated outside of PRISM, but are being added in now. Most of them we covered in the Apollo video, so Apollo, his dead wife Cynthia, the AI version of Cynthia that lives inside of Apollo's glasses, I call her Aika, his best friend Ben, his and Cynthia's biological daughter Aloe, and Cynthia's twin daughters who Apollo adopted, Felicity and Ilaria. And because this part confuses people, Cynthia's nickname is Tia, Felicity's nickname is Lissy, and Ilaria's nickname is Lily. I use their names and nicknames interchangeably, they are not separate characters. And finally, we have Reese. He's an OC I made about a year ago that was more or less unaffiliated. I knew I liked him, I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do with him until now. And he's going to be fulfilling the role of Yu's guardian as her older brother who's a little bitter about having to sacrifice his own youth to raise his kid sister. Their parents are not in the picture for reasons I'm not gonna get into just yet. This brings me to the next thing I want to establish, the subject of names. There's like a clear split down the middle of Western and Japanese names that separate these groups in a way I don't much care for. All of my magical girl characters had been given Japanese names because I was essentially masquerading as an anime, and I don't feel the need to do that anymore. I lived in Japan for a couple years as a literal toddler, and past that, my only experience with Japan has been through the internet. I now think it's kinda silly to base my story in a place and culture my knowledge is so limited about. And I've come to realize I really prefer a more fictional Earth where the countries and creatures are simply not the same as the ones we know. Either way, there's 3 characters from our original cast that I want to rename: Katsumi, Yu, and Izumi. For Izumi, I have a really strong association with her and the letter Z in my head. I think more often than not she's going to be referred to by the nickname Zuzu, but her new legal name is going to be Zoe. It fulfills my Z requirement, and I think it's funny because that's the name Yu Ichigo is given in the 4Kids dub. Kat and Yu have a lot more to their new names though. For Kat, I almost never call her by her full name Katsumi anyway. I'm not even pronouncing it right when I do. It's Katsumi, not Katsumi. And if you're struggling to hear the difference, I essentially put a second T in that bitch for the sake of a pun. So it made sense to change it, as long as whatever her new name was still started with Kat with a K. But it was still really difficult for me, cause Katsumi is really sentimental to me, given that not only has it been her name for 14 years, but because of her, I also use that name myself online for a long-ass fucking time. I was a kid, I was cringe, you can lock me up, it's okay. Either way, it made sense to let her name go, but it was still a big thing for me emotionally, so I wanted to make sure that whatever new name I picked also had emotional significance to me. And wouldn't you know it, I actually had the perfect candidate. If you've been here long enough to remember the original PRISM redesign video, you've probably been here long enough to remember my Webkinz video. Even though my Webkinz phase just barely predates my becoming an artist and creating the original Katsumi, you could argue that my first characters were my Webkinz because of how I played with the stuffed animals. And my very first Webkinz was named Katrina. Bingo. Pow! I loved that as a new name for Cat, and immediately after that, I knew exactly what Yu's new name was gonna be. Because before I went by the name Katsumi online, the name I used when I created those original magical girls was Sarah, S-A-R-A, no H. I went by that because my username on Neopets was Sarah Connor, spelled incorrectly and with a bunch of underscores in it, as in Terminator, as in Sarah Connor and Kyle fucking Reese! The stars aligned, oh, it was perfect. So, there you go, our main characters, Katrina, who also goes by Kat, Emmy, Zoe, who goes by Zuzu, Hokuto, Sarah, and Neneko. At least until 2 of them fuse into one being. But it did get me thinking, I would have an easier time organizing my thoughts about how the characters would change if I took a second look at how they all relate to each other and how they came to be together as a group. So with the help of today's sponsor, Milanote, I made myself a handy-dandy little relationship chart so I could map out the specifics to make sure I was avoiding the overlap that would eventually lead to me consolidating a few of the characters. Milanote is basically an online pinboard designed to help you plan and organize your creative projects. It has a variety of handy tools to help you organize your thoughts before you put your pen to paper. Like I mentioned, I was using it for character relationships and dynamics so I wouldn't get lost in the sea of new names. And I thought I would start with the man of the hour who inspired the reboot, everyone's common denominator, of course it's Apollo. I found Milanote to be perfect for that. It made it super easy with its mood board capabilities and line arrow tool in particular, and honestly, I just feel like what I've made here is a lot more streamlined than something I would have done in, say, a sketchbook. And if you're the type to be daunted by blank canvases, Milanote has over 100 built-in templates available for everyday type of creative projects that you can optionally use to reorganize as necessary. When you're ready to share your work and get some feedback, you can invite people to look at your board and collaborate with you. Just mind the drawing tool. Milanote is available for free with no time limit, so sign up now for a free Milanote account using the link in my description. Thank you to Milanote for sponsoring, and now, back to PRISM. Oh wait, we never left. The magic system for PRISM is going to be largely the same. They still work for an organization where anybody can apply, and if they're accepted, they'll receive a little creature called a prism. It has a dormant form that's shaped like some prominent aspect of the holder's transformed outfit, and an active form that's more animal-like. They're still made out of solid light, but I'm actually going to be calling it solid radiance for now as part of an idea that I'm currently exploring but not ready to share yet. Each prism's power level is still determined by the number and distribution of main and accent colors present in the transformed outfit, and the transformation will still have a unique theme for the outfit and a unique theme for the weapon. Sometimes the themes for the outfits and weapons match, but it doesn't have to. The enemies the magical fighters fight on a regular basis is still this monstrous darkness with ever-shifting forms that I call the absence. And the absence is also comprised of solid radiance. So prisms and absence are like 2 halves of a whole. You still have to interview and be approved to receive a prism, but anyone can get a prism now. Which means we do in fact have a couple magical boys in our midst who didn't have to lie or pull off any kind of trickery to get in. I do think magical fighters are still mostly women, but that's just a happenstance now. That's just how the cookie crumbles. It's my city, it's because I say so. Katrina is still our main character, and her gimmick is still that when she initially becomes a magical girl, she's the weakest one, bar none, because she has absolutely no colors. But over time, as she ends up with more members on her team, more colors get added to her outfit to reflect each teammate. She ends up having the strongest magic by having the most colors, and now she's a double whammy, because she learned to get really good at fighting physically to make up for all those years of her initially lacking magic. Real underdog, except she's a cat. This brings us to our biggest changes. As previously mentioned, I want this to take place on a fantasy fictional Earth. I think magic exists beyond the scope of our prisms and magical fighters, and there's fantastical creatures and monsters out there that exist aside from the absence. In fact, the absence are relatively new. Not only that, they're probably far from the scariest or most dangerous thing out there. It just so happens that they're our main enemies because of forced proximity. I'm still deciding on the exact number, but something like 10 or less years ago, the absence appeared on the very same day that a dark dome formed around the city our story takes place in. This dome is situationally impenetrable. It still seems that liquids and gases can pass through it, but solids cannot. So it's trapped all of the humans, creatures, and absence inside of its walls. Radio waves and electrical signals don't work either, so they've lost internet access, cell phone service. They can't even see through to the other side. Just a wall of darkness keeping everyone locked in the absence's hunting grounds. Life is unable to continue in a traditional way. People have had to get really serious about gardening. They need to find alternate energy sources to power their homes. They need new ways to entertain themselves. If they want new things, they gotta learn to make them with their own hands and using supplies they already have. Lots of jobs have been rendered completely useless. Money's also been rendered useless. I finally got my zombie apocalypse communism, and you can pry it from my cold, dead, Marxist hands. And while the civilians at large are preoccupied with keeping themselves afloat in this new disaster zone, cut off from the rest of the world, PRISM magical fighters are their only real line of defense against the absence. If a civilian is cornered and consumed by the absence, they get lost in this sort of darkness dimension where the absence will torment them until they either starve or a PRISM holder is able to find and rescue them, because they're the only ones who are able to physically fight the absence and enter or exit that dimension freely using their own solid radiance. And this is my favorite part! This is where my baby girl comes in! The person running the PRISM organization is Apollo. When the Dome first formed, Apollo quickly became a notable figure in the community because he was pulling off these incredible feats to give people their lives back. With the power of solid radiance, he put an artificial crystal sun at the highest point of the dome, smack dab in the center, so they could reinstate a proper day and night cycle. He was the only one who was able to provide people with truly new supplies because he could create these giant crystalline structures out of nowhere that could be carved into or used to build so that people could create new furniture and repair their homes. But most importantly, he could make people prisms. The very first magical fighter was his best friend, Ben, who also became well known in the community really quickly, and the two of them created the PRISM organization together to recruit others to help them try and get the absence under control. People were already looking to both of them so much because of Apollo's magic that their responsibilities went up by magnitudes. If people have any kind of problem, absence-related or otherwise, most of them go to Apollo. I like to imagine eventually Apollo posted up a board where people could leave requests for assistance, and either Apollo and Ben themselves would arrive to help out with whatever it was, or they'd assign some of their PRISM fighters to go do it. Either way, they play a huge role in keeping everybody safe and organized and functional, so people aren't only surviving, but thriving. He certainly got detractors out there, like people who are jealous that he ended up in this sort of leadership position pretty immediately and maintained it ever since. And some people disagree with him not just giving everybody a prism to defend themselves. Of which, he has his reasons. I think we'll save discussing that for another video though. For now, let's be so clear. Apollo did not ask for this. He stepped up because he needed to, not because he wanted recognition. And the reason he needed to is because he doesn't actually have any magic at all. That's gonna be my little spin on the secret identity trope. It's not that the PRISM fighters keep their civilian identities a secret, but that Apollo keeps the fact that he's completely powerless a secret. Ben has powers because he has a prism, but Apollo isn't the one who gave it to him. He doesn't even have one for himself. It's his 3 daughters who were born with the solid radiance powers. His adopted twins, Lissy and Lily, are not human, and Aloe is only half human. Cynthia's already dead by the time the dome and the absence appear, but take that as you will. The way their powers manifest is different between all 3 of them, but to sum it up, Lily is the one who is able to create the crystalline structures that can be used as crafting tools, and she can also create weapons that aren't sentient but do oscillate between active and dormant forms. The catch is that they're only able to be operated by herself or transformed prism fighters. In a civilian's hands, they'll remain dormant. And the structures she creates for crafting never had an active form to begin with. Always dormant, basically just normal rocks, but you know, a solid radiance. Lissy is able to create creatures much larger than prisms that do have sentience and also have active and dormant forms, but those creatures wield their own powers. They're almost entirely self-sufficient, as opposed to Aloe, who creates the prisms, which have powers but need a host to wield those powers for them, thus the prism fighters. I'm toying with the idea that because she makes prisms for people directly, the theming of the transformation and the power level at least somewhat reflect Aloe's personal perception of them. So Ben's really strong because he's basically a second father figure to her, and she loves and respects him a lot. I think Neneko has also known Apollo and his family for a long time, well before the dome ever formed, so Neneko is one of the only people who knows their family secret alongside Ben, and their first prism is also super strong because Aloe really looks up to them. And I don't know what happened, but Aloe's original impression of Kat must have been absolute dog shit for her to end up with 0 colors when she first gets her prism, and I think that's hilarious. Either way, aloe makes prisms personalized to people, so if Apollo finishes an interview and thinks someone would be a good fit, he can ask her privately to make a prism just for them, and he will present it. The only people Aloe can't make prisms for are herself, her sisters, and her father. And presumably their biological connection is what makes Apollo incompatible with Aloe's prisms. This family secret is so important because Apollo is terrified that if people knew his child daughters were the ones that were actually capable of fighting the absence, there would be some expectation for them to join the battlefield. And dude's already 70 shades of fucked up over losing his wife. He is not about to risk his kids. Fuck that. Fuck you for thinking it. They're all he has left. This does, of course, bring into question then, what the fuck is up with Sarah? Why is someone else's kid allowed to be on the battlefield? She's not. I think Sarah getting a prism is going to end up being something Aloe did without consulting Apollo about it, and that's a horrifying situation for everyone to have to figure out how to deal with when it happens. But I do want to clear that up because in the old version of PRISM, the organization was clearly pretty shady with who it gave prisms to, like children. And people have been theorizing that Apollo would be a villain of some kind on his video. That is not the case. My boy has good intentions. I totally get what you guys are saying with how his whole obsession with not letting go of his dead wife is a good setup for a villain, but I'm gonna leave that to the ḥᵗᵗᵗ and the GinjaNinjaOwos out there. Also, to those of you who figured out that Lusine was the villain in the original draft, yeah. I think that's gonna wrap us up for this video, but I am far from done with PRISM. Buddy, I am just getting started. The Apollo brain rot has evolved into full-on PRISM brain rot, and I've got a lot of stuff I really want to do with this series. It's all I think about. Like I've mentioned a few times now, I've already started on a digital sketchbook as a follow-up to this one, and it's almost finished. We'll be making it into its own video. It's slated to be uploaded next month in December, and I'll be going into more depth about all of the main characters' new designs and personalities and backstories there. Trust me, this sketchbook has not prepared you for how much these characters are going to change. I've posted a couple previews publicly here and there, but if you're antsy and you want to see all of it now while also supporting us and making more PRISM content, you can check that out on my Patreon. Everything is already there for just $2 whole, but that's not all. If you really liked this video and want to get a closer look at any of the pages, we've made it into our very first printed sketchbook. Volume 1 of PRISM pre-production is going to be available on our website in December at actuallyrae.com. I designed the cover to be sketchy, so if we ever table at conventions or anything, people get the idea that everything inside is in fact sketches. And Apollo's on the cover because I think he's the only character right now that I feel like has his design solidified. I think he's perfect. If you'd like to buy but don't see your country listed for shipping, please send an email to Caden at actuallyrae.merch@gmail.com. Again, that's actuallyrae.merch@gmail.com. Each country needs to be added manually in order to get the most fair pricing we can offer for shipping, so it's hard to do them all at once. And he's been trying really hard to keep trawling the comments for people listing their countries. It'd just be a lot easier on us if you shot us an email rather than a YouTube comment. They're easier to track. Again, these books will be made available sometime in December alongside some sticker sheets of what I'm dubbing the classic PRISM designs. And more is certain to come in the future as well, so keep your eyes peeled for that. So thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you to our patrons. $2 a month gets you access to everything I post, like all those previews of the digital sketchbook I mentioned, and so much more. $5 a month gets you access to our twice-monthly patron-exclusive live streams, and $10 gets your name at the end of my videos, just like this. I am truly so excited for PRISM right now. Like, I can't express it enough. I can see it becoming like a real main part of my content going forward. I really like the idea of fully documenting the behind-the-scenes creation of a story as it's happening, especially because I'm kind of sick to death of being so precious and sitting on my ideas and withholding spoilers because I'm holding out on the hope that I can make it into a proper series one day. Like, shit, a pilot on its own is expensive as hell. What happens if I never make it to that point? I don't want to risk dying with my ideas. I'd rather have fun with them now, and if I get to do something official with it someday, cool. Maybe it's like an extra layer of interest that I was so open about the creation process going into it. But this way, even if that never happens, I still get to have fun sharing my ideas with you guys. If all I'll ever be is an OC artist YouTuber, then I'm gonna be the happiest one out there. That sounds pretty good to me. Hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you later. Bye!